PokeClass is sponsored by CollectorsCash.com, your #1 online store for all you need for the Pokemon trading card game. They have all the top competitive and collector's cards on the market at prices you won't find lower anywhere else. Whether you're after tins and packs from the current format, or just looking for those hard to get primes to finish off your deck, Collector's Cash is your place to go. Make sure you check them out at www.collectorscash.com.
Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 54 of PokeClass. Noble Victories has just started seeing play in the competitive environment, certainly taking its toll on the metagame over in the US. Quite a few new decks have been created with the release of this set, which has made the format a lot more diverse than it already was. Today, I'm just going to be talking about one deck that has a very interesting concept behind it and has been creeping its way into the top tier. Let's talk about Chandelure. So Chandelure definitely slipped under the radar of the original release of Noble Victories, with players focusing their attention on the likes of Eviolite, Electric and Vanillux. However, this card has definitely been taken into consideration by players in the US, and has currently racked up a total of 5 City Championship wins already, steaming ahead of many of the older decks in the format. So what is this card all about? Well, let's have a look. So we're looking at a stage 2 with 130 HP, which is a great start since a lot of offensive Pokemon at the moment are maxing out at around 120 damage without any plus power help. It also bears the incredibly nice Dark weakness over the usual Psychic, which means the likes of Mew won't be able to wreak havoc on it. The thing this card is all about though is its ability Cursed Shadow. This power simply states, when Chandelure is active, once during your turn you may place 3 damage counters on any of your opponent's Pokemon in any way you like. This may remind you of the likes of Kingdra Prime, simply because you can add extra damage to the field to make your attack stronger. The only downside is, Chandelure must be active in exchange for 3 damage drops rather than just the 1. The attack, Eerie Glow, does 50 damage for 2 Psychic and a colourless, which doesn't sound too great, but it does leave the defending Pokemon burned and confused. Both of these status conditions are great to inflict and will usually force a retreat out of the opponent unless they feel like facing the risk of 30 self damage, along with the possible 20 from burn. So now we've seen the card, we know that it has the magic 130 HP, has a decent ability and an average attack, so what should we be pairing this with? There are 2 ways that people have decided to run this deck, both of which are quite different, but revolve around using Chandelure's ability twice or even more times during a turn. This not only spreads 6 damage counters across any of your opponent's Pokemon you like, but can set up for some very nice KOs if using Chandelure's attack. The first way of running Chandelure looks something like this. This version, as you can see, might look a little strange since it runs no energy whatsoever and a lot of trainers for a deck in this format. The aim of this version is focused solely on Chandelure's ability and being able to possibly drop over 100 damage per turn without even having to use an attack. So we currently see a very trainer heavy list, and the only Pokemon we're looking at right now are the main Chandelure line, your Dodrio support and Cleffa for dead hands, standard in pretty much everything. 424 Chandelure is a safe number and pretty standard, but can be up to 434 if you find it to be a little bit slow via rare candy, since you definitely will be able to find the room for it. Dodrio is your main source for getting that extra 3 damage drops throughout the game, since it makes Chandelure's retreat cost free and currently sits at a 2-2 line in this list. You can safely go up to 3-3 just to keep them coming out because they will get KO'd very often. As for trainers and supporters, everything is aimed at either getting Chandelure out or keeping it alive for as long as possible. Maximum Sage's training along with Max Pond and Twins all make for great search and straight draw to get your Chandelures out when either going first or suffering the first KO. Another option could be N, since it is such a great comeback card in this format right now, and you could put your opponent down to an unworkable hand size while they watch you spread damage everywhere around their board. 4 Junkam and 4 Switch are absolutely necessary for making full use of Cursed Shadow, since you'll be able to use the ability, retreat to another Chandelure using Dodrio's Pokebody, and then use a switch or 2 to drop even more damage throughout your turn, and this is what makes this version of the deck so tricky to play against. Other support in here through trainers such as Defender is optional, but should certainly be considered if running this version of the deck. Defender sponges potential blue flare and bolt strike with plus power KOs from happening too often, and cards like Rocky Helmet could also be extremely useful in helping you to spread damage around the field, but from your opponent's doing rather than your own. Max Potion is amazing in this deck since you aren't going to be using any energy whatsoever, so just get rid of that damage that will start building up on your Chandelures and make your opponent start again while you carry on spreading the damage. Overall, this version is incredibly quick and rather difficult to play against since you don't know how many times they're going to be able to drop 3 damage counters in their turn, and you can't really prepare for it either since they can drop it anywhere they like, so no putting up fodder just to set up behind something. The main rule is just try and avoid benching single basics at a time that you're planning to evolve, because they will get sniped straight away, and also be wary of N if you're holding onto an evolution in your hand. As always, Tropical Beach should be considered if you own multiple copies. This second version is a lot more focused on Chandelure's attack, but can still deal extra damage around the board by using the ability multiple times per turn. However, this time we've added ourselves the element of Trainer Lock. As soon as you see Chandelure, you notice that it has the magic 130 HP, making it an ideal candidate for adding in Vileplume to avoid any one-hit KOs from popular attackers such as Reshiram and Zekrom, still huge contenders in this format. I believe this to be the better version of the deck since it has a lot of options throughout the game and can respond a little better to more decks in the format. As you can imagine, the deck is a lot less aggressive than the version shown a moment ago, but when this does get set up through Method of Twins and Tropical Beach, you have a deck that has a very flexible damage output while the opponent struggles to KO you in one attack. Here's a skeleton list to get you started on building. So this list is actually looking quite standard for a deck revolving around Vileplume, but you may notice an extremely thick line of Chandelure is being used, and that's because you need to get multiple ones out of these as soon as possible. But with Trainer Lock on both sides of the field, you're going to have to do it the traditional way to get anywhere. This means that you can skimp a little bit on the rare candies and communications since you're only going to need them for getting your Vileplume going as soon as possible, and when you get that out, the Chandelures come shortly after. Having this thicker line also allows you to get away with running the maximum amount of Sage's training, since your resources are a little bit more expendable in terms of Pokemon. Having the maximum amount of Sage also gives you the maximum amount of draw power possible in a Trainer Lock deck, and gives you the option of getting rid of those unwanted trainers in favour of usable cards when Vileplume comes out. The options you have here are other methods of draw and support to keep the flow of Chandelures coming. The main debate of draw power is going to be between either Tropical Beach and Professor Oak's new theory. Now this decision is usually out of the player's control, simply because most players don't actually have these cards or can't get hold of multiple copies, but you can still run the deck without it since you are attacking in this version. However, not having Tropical Beach would cause me to run a lot more Pond simply because you definitely want that early game draw power through both this and Sage's training. Here's a complete list that doesn't include Tropical Beach, and it has been working incredibly well for me so far in testing. As you can see, the list features a lot of draw supporters to keep those Chandelure coming as frequently as possible and get that Vileplume out on turn 3 at the latest. Dodrio is still needed in here to give you multiple uses of Cursed Shadow as possible in a turn, and can turn that 50 attack into a possible 130 if burn flips go your way. However, sheer power isn't exactly what the deck is going for every single turn. Pichu is golden in this deck, and I like it in a lot of decks, but especially ones that involve Vileplume. This just assures that you get out all of your Pokemon turn 1, and even if your opponent does get evolved the next turn, you kind of want them to take an early prize because you can then take control of an epic Twins chain. I don't see why you wouldn't run it unless your area runs a lot of Tyro, but I'd see it as a positive pretty much every game starting with it. Another mention has to be Jirachi, which is running here to take full advantage of being able to spread damage across the board every single turn. By having Jirachi in here, you'll be able to utilise the psychic energy that you discard through regular play and start sending evolutions back to the opponent's hand, resulting in many KOs near the end of the game, possibly catching your opponent off guard. I guess you could also find some space for Shaman if you really wanted to get some form of energy acceleration in there, but bench space is already crucial here and isn't going to be worth it in every single game. Flower Shop Lady over Super Rod is probably obvious, but Flower Shop is a good card in a deck that runs thick lines of their main attacker, and can save those pieces of your crucial lines that you may have been forced to discard earlier on with some Sage's training. Either way, I really like it in this deck, and should be at least tested since you need to keep the stage 2s coming. This goes the same for Rescue Energy. It just lets you attach it onto the active Chandelure that may be going down next turn while you set up a Lampent on the bench, and then you can recover all pieces of Chandelure and start building it right back up again. Overall, I much prefer this version of the deck simply because, as I said earlier, it allows for some more options during the game, and I feel it's just a little less fragile than the trainer based one. Definitely try out both though, because playing under trainer lock is quite difficult in this format with the lack of search supporters we have at the moment, but it's definitely up to you. So that should give you all a pretty nice overview of one of the newest decks being introduced to the competitive world. This deck is currently fringing on tier 1 and can outdo a lot of decks we already have at the moment. I would be wary if Chandelure becomes popular in your area. Absol Prime is probably the way to go right now if you're looking for a no-nonsense counter. It's easy to get out and relatively efficient to get going quick enough to answer to Chandelure and start knocking it out every single turn. Just be wary of this if players are becoming aware of the deck in your area, but it shouldn't be too popular at the moment. So that's all I have for you this week. Thank you all for watching this week's episode of PokeClass. Make sure you rate, comment and subscribe in the bottom left or top right hand corner in a second, and I'll see you all next week.